Hello everybody, welcome to Homemaking Radio. I hope you get a lot of things done while you're listening today, and whatever your circumstances are right now, I hope you do your best but have great plans for its improvement. And today, before I get started, I want to share my teacup with you. It's a viola and it matches my sparkly cardigan that I'm wearing today. I have several of these and nowhere to go. Several of these and nowhere to go. So I'm wearing this for you. And also, I have noticed that we have some more 14 or 16 more weeks of this blustery, dreary, dark winter. And I am finished with it. I've done my time. And I've shivered enough. And I have decided that I'm finished with it. And I'm going to do spring, and I know that these violas will be blooming soon under a tree somewhere in the middle of winter, just to give us a little bit of cheer. And so I'm going to be doing some stealth sipping over there. And so speaking of stealth sipping, I ordered myself a treat. It's part of my self-care, and I don't know if you've ever heard of this brand, and I love canisters. I just don't know why I like tins so much. Perhaps the way I grew up, tins were fascinating. You see them all over the place in the thrift stores now. And this is called Red Velvet Cake, and it's by a company called Pinky Up. I'm thinking it's Australian. I haven't actually looked it up yet, but I saw it in our local store, and it was expensive. But as I told somebody, well, I don't have any vice. I don't smoke. I don't drink. I don't go out to movies. I don't even go to a coffee shop, and so I needed a vice, and I can pay a little bit more. So I can't really show it to you, but I can tell you about how it smells. I would say chocolate and almond are strong in it, and maybe a little vanilla, but it has in it, and it's a herbal tea. And it's loose leaf, so you have to have something called tea filters. And what they are these little bags, kind of like coffee filters, and you put, a teaspoon or so in there. Then you can fold that down and put it in your cup or your teapot. And so I wanted to tell you about this, and I think that Red Velvet Cake, if I'm not wrong, now some of you from Texas tell me, because I always thought it was from Texas, but Red Velvet Cake was invented in Texas, but maybe not. The reason is I had a cousin that wrote to me when I grew up in the homestead in the wilderness in Alaska, and sent me, when I was 16, back in late 1950s or early 60s, a recipe for Red Velvet Cake. So I always thought it was Texan, and it's nice. And I tell you something, when you're sipping some of these herbal teas, just make a little bit in the bottom of a cup, and you might have to add something like a drop of honey or some sweetener and a bit of cream, because it's not like your black tea that we in the U.S. like to drink. I love my Yorkshire Gold, but I wouldn't put anything in it. You might have to put something in this. And then I was so happy to get that I went back to see what else they had, and they had one other, and it was called cinnamon bun. Now, I don't know why I think this is Australian. I think I know why it's Australian. I know why, and I'll tell you why. I'll read the ingredients. Apple, almond, beetroot, cinnamon, roasted almond, and green tea. Okay, where's the clue? It's beetroot. We say beets here, or beet juice, but we never say beetroot, and so that's why I'm thinking it's Australian, but it might not be. And so this cinnamon bun, you can taste, but sometimes the scent is all I need. So smelling it is just as, coffee and tea don't taste the same as they smell. So sometimes I just want to smell, and it cheers me up. And it is a guilt-free indulgence, healthier than sugary soda, cake, and cookies. It'll perk you up and make Wednesdays feel like Fridays. And so, let's see what's in it. This is interesting. Cinnamon, maple, orange, carrot, black currant, nutmeg. It's exciting, isn't it? So I'm going to pour some of that in my little bag and go in this little bag here and go stealth sipping. And I'll send you a picture of where I went if the weather's not too bad. And so today I always start out, you girls, with preparation. And the reason for this is the influence that it has on your own brain and on other people. And one of the things that I noticed in a book I read way back in the 1970s, and it was called SHE, Sidetracked Home Executives, which later on someone turned it into, is it called Fly Lady, where they teach you how to have a schedule and a routine in your home for those that aren't used to it. And it gets more complicated too, because back in the 1950s there was a lot less to think about or take care of for the home, and we had a little more leisure time. But now there's just so much more. And that book, SHE, Sidetracked Home Executives, or you can go to flylady.com and you can print off a lot of her stuff and put it in a notebook and use it, and it will help you tremendously. Now, so one of the things that I learned from that way back when it was Sidetracked Home Executives was to put shoes on. And why was that? Because she said if you're scuffing around in a pair of what we called house shoes or slippers, you're giving your mind the impression or the feeling that you're going to just kind of stroll around all day and not and just relax and not do anything, because slippers just kind of make you think relaxation. Now, so they suggested wearing shoes. And so also there was a book that came out around the same era called Dress for Success, and it was for men, and it had parts in it for women too, but this was before more women were out working outside the home. And it said that many men were having to work at home for one reason or other, because they started their own business or for other reasons. And so to make them more successful, because they would be talking on the phone or they would be talking to customers, they suggested that even if you're working from home in your home office, that you dress up. And they suggested that the men wore a button-down shirt and even a tie, and always wear shoes. Because it gives you a more professional feeling and more of a success, a feeling of seriousness. So today, let's see, then there was another one that I'm trying to think what the name of it was. Gone with the Wind. And it was a movie, and there was a making of the Gone with the Wind movie that was out not long ago, and I watched it and listened to it. And it was interviews of the people that did the costumes. And one of the actors said to them, but why does it matter what kind of socks we have on with our shoes? And he said, you might not notice it, but, or something like, other people might not see it, but you will feel it, and you will walk differently, and you will act differently in a costume. And so the costumes had to be very, very authentic, and down to the petticoats that the women wore, to whatever they wore under their hats. Sometimes there was another hat under that, and sometimes the actors would say, I don't see the point in wearing this or wearing that, but the designer said, yes, but you will feel it. So that is the reason why today I sat down here and somehow could not get my head together, and I looked down at my feet, and what did I have on? I had on my slipper socks. And so I went and got a pair of fancy shoes that I never wear. I bought them years ago at a Walmart because my husband was attending one of those college anniversaries, 50-year college anniversaries, were some of the people that were still alive. And so I wanted to wear some fancy shoes to the dinner. And so I bought these little slip-ons here. As you can see, I only wore them that one night, but I keep everything, and I'm wearing them today so that I feel more serious about what I'm talking about. And so you can get yourself dressed up and get ready and get your favorite teacup out, have a cup of tea, make your list. Your list is, you can look at the same thing every day, but if you'll write a few things, somehow putting your mind on paper helps to add a few things to it. And also, what about the homemaking and what about the getting ready? You can go online or find books on things and learn about your hair care and learn about your skin care and learn about how to dress and learn many things about homemaking too. I know years ago Martha Stewart was very popular, and I think it was even before the web, and her magazines had a lot of step-by-step instructions, and there were others too, and you can learn all about that somewhere else. And that's why I don't sit here and give you tips and recipes, because the world is just so abundant with them. So this is just some of my ideas of the home, and it's just here not to take too seriously, but enough to entertain you while you work. So I have had some conversations and some homemaking experiences that I'll probably relate to you, and one thing is called dishes in the sink. I do have a dishwasher, and whenever someone sees dishes in the sink, they say, don't you have a dishwasher? Like automatically those dishes in the sink would just be in there. But sometimes, because it can get rather busy if everything I use I put immediately in the dishwasher. It doesn't always happen that way because things happen so fast around here. Sometimes one load will get finished and then another load kind of piles up as I do more things. And so what I do is I fill the sink with water and I put dishes in that sink, and then when I get ready and the dishwasher is empty, I load it all with pre-rinsed dishes. Now some people don't do it that way, and this is not for you to say that I insist on doing it that way, but I will look at the dishes in the sink and sometimes get a little panic, and I have to discipline myself from going in there and getting started, because when you start in the kitchen, this is what they told us at Sidetracked Home Executives, if you start in the kitchen, sometimes you can't get out, because once that kitchen is so beautiful and clean, oh, let's make something, or let's do something in here. And so that was one of the things that they started with, and they would tell you to start in the front room or move clockwise, picking up and arranging, and just to get your body going and just to get your brain functioning. And a lot of people will tell you that that really helped. And I had a lovely conversation with one of my children just today, and he's the son that has the farm. And so he was saying that sometimes he gets up and it's like, oh no, I've got so much to do, and it'd be just easier to feel discouraged. But he said, once I got up and started moving around, even in a small way, just moving around, walking around, then my whole attitude changed. So if you're having trouble with anxiety or any kind of discouragement, then I would suggest that's all you do. Get yourself a cup of tea and go walking through your house. Just walk around your house, just kind of observe. And it's almost like, oh no, you think this is going to work on somebody like me? And you'll find the weight and the burden of the thinking being lifted. And also take a little, I have pockets in my apron. I love these cards, and I stick them in there, and when I think of something that I might like to do or go get at the grocery store, like this tin, and by the way, I will use this tin for many different things when it's empty, although I'll tell you what, that cake tea smells so good. And so for homemaking, I think that I was talking to a dear friend this morning also, and she's so delightful. I just wish I could get her for an interview, because she said that is the one thing that the homemakers neglect the most is their self-care. They feel that they have to. They cannot do anything for themselves. like, like just some of these little things, getting dressed up, nice things for themselves, nice cup of tea, a self-care, things that make them happy, because they have to take care of other people and they don't think that they are maybe not deserving of it, or they don't have time of it. And she says that's the worst thing you can do, is neglect yourself. Now, I understand if there's emergencies at home, if you have a newborn, or if you have people who are sick and you're waiting on them. But even then, if someone is not well and you're looking after them, you can still go in, take a shower, and get yourself prepared, and then you can take better care of them. And if your house is falling apart around you, you can take better care of it if you'll take care of yourself first. Now, one of the things that I learned in this conversation with my son that has the farm, and he's always, what was it Roger said about Molly? You always do us good, Molly. He always does me good. He was talking about a cow. And he told me about the Black Angus, and then there was another cow, a Charolais, a Black Angus and a Charolais that were in the fields there in where he lives, and it's a dry area and a hot, dry climate. And he was telling me about how they bred those two to make a cow called the Murray Grey, and that it was very much loved in Australia. So those of you in Australia, you learned something about a cow called the Murray Grey. And he said that it's arid, it's in the arid places, and that it's very drought resistant and hardy and easy, and very popular in Texas particularly now too. So he was telling me about this Murray Grey. He was describing it to me, and I said, get me a picture, and he still hasn't got a picture for me yet. But he was so interested in that cow many years ago when he was really young, and he just happened to be in a place where someone had some of those, and so he was really excited. He called to tell me about this cow, and he reminded me of Osborne in Wives and Daughters. And Osborne had come home from the rural show of cows. And he came home. He'd gone to please his father, I think, to go and see all the newest things in farming. And he came home and he told his mother, I'm afraid bullocks are not in my line. He just wasn't as interested in those as in poetry. So I feel like when I talk to him, my son that has a farm, I feel like I'm in Wives and Daughters, the way he talks. It gets excited about a cow. So now I do have a hint for homemaking for some of you that might need a little extra encouragement, and that is to make homemaking interesting. And now, some of us, we don't need to make it interesting. We like to get into it with our hands, get it all cleaned up, and that's interesting to us. I like to listen to something like an audiobook or something else, or talk to someone on the phone if they've got time. If they're doing something, you can hear their dishes rattling in the distance, and she can hear my dishes, and we solve everything. We solve all the world problems. So I told you about self-care for your appearance and for yourself, for your peace of mind, and preparation in the morning is your appearance and your stretches, a little bit of exercise. If all you do is stand up straight and reach for the sky, that's good enough. And your spiritual preparation to pray for everybody in your family, all of your children, all of your grandchildren, and your husband, because I don't know if you know this, but probably there isn't anybody else praying for everybody in your family, and so it's up to you. And also self-care for your house. And so you have to learn to care for it in a way that's more than just mechanical, that isn't just we'll get this out of the way and do it, and make it a nice place. And it's called self-care. That's where you can go on YouTube and find lots of young women who, I like what the young women are doing. They'll go out and get ideas, you know, from shops and different places, and then come home and try to reproduce it with what they have. And you remember that I was reading to you out of Stepping Heavenward, and I mentioned it again yesterday because I had talked to one of my other children about it, and it was about Katie wanting to do so much that was heroic and for the world, and it was greatness. And the minister's wife asked her this question. She said, "Oh, I want to do so much, and I want to have good friends and a pleasant home, and I want to do so much, and I want to be accomplished and learned, and have a very fine life." And she said to her, "Do you have some home duties?" She said, "Yes, I have the care of my own room, and Mother wants me to have a general oversight of the parlor. You know, we have but one parlor now. That'd be the entry room or the front room where people would wait. They wouldn't go into the family's private quarters. There were just one room kept nice, you know, for visitors, kind of like our lounge room, our front room, our living rooms." And I have read this to you. This is the third time I've read this to you, and you're probably saying, "Mrs. Sherman, why do you just tell us the same stuff?" Well, this is where what homeschooling is all about. It's about also how you raise your children too. Is you may tell them the same thing 3 different times with 3 different views of it, or 3. It's like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's like 4 men standing around a lake, and one of them sees the events from the north, and one from the south, and one from the east, and one from the west, so they can all describe it in a slightly different way, or add something that the other one didn't add or see in his report. And it's the same when we read scriptures. We may know the story of Noah and the ark. Well, I already know that. I've read the Bible. I already know that. But did you know that there are many different spiritual aspects and applications to these historical accounts in the Bible? So you can look that up too. You can do a search for that, spiritual applications of the ark, and find out that every time you read it, you grow a little bit in your mind. Now, those of you who have had mathematics know that at a certain age you just couldn't quite grasp something, and it would make you cry. You couldn't quite grasp a mathematical equation. You just didn't, but maybe by the time you were 30, you've figured it out easily, as your brain hadn't quite matured or opened up to it. So it's the same when I read to you the same story 3 different times. We're just going to look at it in a different aspect. So, and even Moses was told by God, you know, tell the people where they came from, how I brought them up out of slavery, and where I'm taking them, and what we're doing, and all the good things along the way that I did for them. And when you finish with that, tell them to tell their children, and their children to tell their children's children, and then tell them all over again. And so that's the way we live, isn't it? But it sounds different each time when you know that you're going to sift through it a little bit differently. So I'm going to sift through it for one of the things I'm going to tell you today, and it's about youth staying home, young people staying home, because of several reasons. And so I might go ahead and tell you that. And that is, here's the advantages of being home. And in the old days, in the Bible, in olden times, in ancient civilizations, and in some modern civilizations, children that are grown go from their parents' house, to their own family, you know, to their husband and their wife, and don't have that wasteful in-between time of being single, where their time and their labor and their money and their rest are all used up, and their health. So what does it do for you to stay home? And this applies to the woman too, and the man too, because I think men should be home too, having their own businesses if they possibly could. I mean, why do they send the men so far away from the home where they can't keep track of the needs of their growing children? But nonetheless, that's the way it's always been. Even a farmer had to go out into the field during the day. So the advantages of the youth staying home is financial, is protection. Let's just talk about the word protection. And you might say, and didn't we hear some old tired phrase that was thrown at us all the time when we were growing up, you're overprotecting or something like that. Is protection financially. Once you get away from home, it's going to cost you a lot of money. And it's going to cost all the money that you earn. You will come out away with it with very, very little, or nothing. It will protect you emotionally. The stress of constant work and the rush around of the kind of life that many people have to live when they live alone, and the broken down friendships, people that you thought were your friends were just using your time and your money, your lack of emotional support from your family, which you got when you lived at home, and also illnesses. It protects you from illness, which most of the time when young people leave home, they get sick and they start having serious health problems. And so physically, it's the protection. Physically, because and spiritually, you're in spiritual danger when you leave the protection and the honoring of your parents. And so that's just very simplistic, and you can check this out yourself. And I would say what to do if you're staying home and you say to yourself, what do I do at home? First of all, get expert at something in the home. Even if you're a young man, get expert at fixing something. Get expert at windows. Get expert at doors. Get expert at floors. Get expert at repairing anything. Get expert at many different things, because the home is where people are the most patient and accepting of you. That's where you're totally under grace, is at home. I mean, how many parents put up with some of the outbursts of immature children, and they still adore them and love them? That won't happen out there on your own in the world. They won't let you get away with it. And so home, use it to your advantage. This is a time when you get to read to your heart's content. And I've heard many young women say, I didn't realize how busy I would get once I started getting my own children. And remembering the times when she was allowed to lay in bed and read a book, usually a Jane Austen book. So do your best to take advantage of it. And one thing for girls is, you know how, and I don't know if any of you did this, but we always did it. We drew house plans when we were younger, or we drew pictures of houses we'd like, and my daughter certainly did. And just these wonderful little cottages, or we collected pictures of them, or from magazines and books. And so you know how you might not get that exterior that you so much like, and a lot of people had trouble with that they'd have an idea of a house in mind but could not get it, but they became experts at the interiors. And I think that was what Home Interiors, that company, was all about. You might not have the outer look of the beautiful cottage or Victorian house or seaside house or bungalow or whatever you wanted, but you could do it on the inside. You could make it into a western place. You could make it into a country place. You could make it into something very rich looking or Victorian looking or rustic or whatever you wanted, because they had all those different styles. And you can become expert at the interiors, and that way you can adjust wherever you go to what you have and make it beautiful inside. I used to agonize quite a bit over the look of the manse and the outer look of the manse, and then someone made me a fence for they did it out of spindles, and they made me a fence for the porch, and it just changed the look, and they were portable too. I could take them out, put them in, put them somewhere else. And so become an expert at interiors if you're home. Have a look at things that in a different way. Look at your cabinets and your bookshelves and think of more efficient ways to use everything, and make it so that your house is more pleasing. The house that belongs to your mother and father is more pleasing. And I'll read this again because this is what Mrs. Prentice was saying in this diary of Katie's. She said, "You have some home duties, I suppose." "Yes, I have the care of my own room, and Mother wants me to have a general oversight of the parlor." "Is that all you have to do?" "Oh, no, my music and drawing take up a good deal of time, and I read and study more or less, and go out some, and we have a good many visitors." "I suppose, then, you keep your room nice and tidy, and that the parlor is dusted every morning, loose music put out of the way, books restored in their places?" "Oh, now I know Mother's been talking to you." "Your mother has told me nothing at all." "Well, then," I said, laughing, but a little ashamed, "I don't keep my room in nice order, and my mother really sees to the parlor herself, though I pretend to do it." "Is she ever annoyed by the neglect?" "Oh, yes, very annoyed." And I'm going to stop there before I finish it, because of course she eventually comes around to realize that she has to make some changes, and talk to you about a little scripture, 2 Timothy 3:5-7. And it's the one that talks about a form of godliness but denying the power. And so I wrote a form of godliness without the power behind it. And so here we have something that's quite common in every era. Every young person does it or is tempted to do it, or they come across as having come from such a nice family. They're very well taught, they have good manners, they dress properly, they don't try not to offend people, and they're generally an advantage to everyone around them, but they've got this little form of godliness but without the power, and that is, I look like I'm okay, but inside I'm neglecting something, and I am maybe sneaking around the situation and going in the back door of a situation and not actually doing the things that I'm supposed to do. I figure out sly ways of avoiding it. They may even quote a scripture to their mother that day or on the way out the door and not do anything. So the family thinks, oh, well, she's real religious, so, maybe it was just an oversight that she didn't do the things that were her responsibility. Or maybe she's just forgetful, and she's all nice, and maybe she's even singing hymns. That is a form of godliness, and what real godliness is doing the right thing. And so let me finish the story, because I read it to you before. So her mother was very much annoyed because she neglected her duties. "Well then, Katie dear, suppose your first act of heroism tomorrow," and it all began because she wanted to be heroic, she wanted to do something great, "should be gratifying your mother in these little things, though they are little. Surely your first duty, next to pleasing God, is to please your mother, and in every possible way to sweeten and beautify her life. You know people who have several daughters. They ought to have the prettiest home on the neighborhood, because those daughters all use their talents, maybe choose a different expertise, and pull their strength and talent together to make their home the most pleasant place it could be. You may depend upon it that a life of real heroism and self-sacrifice must begin and lay its foundation in this little world, wherein it learns its first lessons and takes its first step, the little world of the home. And do you really think God notices such things? My dear child, what a question. If there is one truth I would gladly impress on your mind is just this: God notices the most trivial acts. And you know that the home is where greatness begins, in the human heart. But what a lot of people think is, well, my family doesn't get along. Everybody's arguing all the time, and so therefore I'm not happy here, so I'm just going to leave. And even women and men do it too. Husbands and wives do it too. But here's the problem. Are you causing the arguments? Are you doing things that makes the rest of the family upset, and then they start to discuss it and then get mad at each other and start taking sides? Are you part of the problem? Now, some people are really good at this, and they come off looking very angelic, but they've neglected something, or they've done something in the home that puts more burden on somebody else, and then someone goes and tells the parent, and then the parent doesn't see it or doesn't understand it, and it starts to cause this friction and this conflict. And other people will say, well, they're just so argumentative in my home, I think I'll just leave. The clue to this is, and this is what we learn so much better in homeschooling, and that is that's the whole point of staying home, is to learn to get along and to handle all these different things and to handle the conflict, because what good does it do to leave? You're just going to repeat it all in the next home you're in. Even if you go and live with somebody and pay room and board, you're just going to do the same things and create more conflict. And then all your life you'll say, there's just conflict all around me. I can't figure it out. But this book, I've had it, I think, in my shelf for a long time, and we just never got around to reading it. But in lieu of it, we started to observe. And I would tell my daughter, you just observe other young people your age, and if they are in trouble and they're doing things that are not in line with honoring parents or with the scriptures, then don't do it. And I remember there have been girls that have told me that they didn't really have anything like this, or any homeschooling or any advice from their parents, but they watched the other children, and whatever they got in trouble for or whatever was bringing them down, they just didn't do it. And so observation is a great thing too, to observe in life. And remember never to substitute religious fervor or missionary ambitions, for real honoring of the home and at home. And it's called, and it was a form of having a form of godliness, but denying the power. So it was a facade. And this is one thing we have to be careful with at home. And so youth that are home, but they're making life miserable for other people, need to look to themselves to see how they could change their. You see, home is a character training base. If it doesn't get too harmful for other people, I suppose, it's a character training base, and that's what it's for, because it teaches us how to get along in our next home and with our own families. And and there are people from homes, even my age, even in their vital years, who believed that they just got life gave them a short shrift and they didn't get the advantages that they should have had. And but in many ways, I don't think life is perfect ever for anybody, and I don't believe that it didn't have there was a poem or a story about it, and that was that life never runs smoothly. And you can see it from the beginning. You can see Adam and Eve, and you can see Noah, and you can see Abraham and Sarah, and you can see all their children and all the things that. And even Isaac, I don't think Isaac went into deep bitterness or despair because the Philistines or whoever it was were filling up his wells with dirt and you don't see any record of him giving up and saying, well, I'm not going to do livestock anymore because I didn't get a good start and all the wells were filled up with dirt. You look at these people and they got back up and kept going, and isn't there a scripture that says that a wise man, though he falls 7 times, gets up? Or maybe it was 100 times, I don't know. So when you're home, now this I'm talking to young people, but us vital people, this is helpful. What to do when there's nothing to do, when you can't do anything at home. For instance, I'm thinking of snowed in, iced in, or just, no fuel for your car, too far away to go anywhere, and you feel like you're confined or anything. Well, listen what we used to do when there's a lull in time. You can make plans. You can make lists. You can write. You can read. You can look up things and learn a skill. And during that so-called shutdown, there were a lot of grandparents who were buying these Skillshare programs for their grandchildren that they couldn't see. And one of my grandchildren learned photography to an expert level. And when he came to see me, I took him places so he could get out of the car and take photographs. And so, yes, you can take the time to learn a skill at home, but don't do the form of godliness thing, where yes, you're on the web learning a skill, but then you're still in contact with the friends and the bad crowd that brought you down. You're still checking on them. And I have friends that have told me that even though their parents didn't want them involved in a certain business because it wasn't like something that they wanted her to be in, and it was not on the up and up, and it wasn't as profitable, or there was some reason they didn't want her involved in the business, so they didn't want her contacting all the people in this business, but she went in the back door and she contacted their friends or their relatives, or she went online and saw their social media. So she was really it's like yeast, it'll grow and you get a little bit of it. There are some people that are terribly allergic to yeast. I had a friend that wouldn't come into my house unless I could guarantee there was no bread and there was no yeast in the house, because she was it was causing yeast in her body or something. And if you get a tiny bit of it, then it just grows. And so that's what it was like. In fact, in the New Testament and the Old, yeast represented sin, and because it grows. And so now I'd like to talk a little bit more about tea, and I wanted to start out with tea since I had brought these tins. And this is from the book Tea with Jane Austen, and it's by Kim Wilson. And I had mentioned before that tea was often just herbs. So she has a little section here called Herbs and Dandelions. By Jane Austen's time, tea was such an important part of life that people tended to call all leaf infusions tea, whether or not they contained any real tea leaves. For centuries, the British had drunk herbal infusions, which went by the name tisanes. That's what we call them. They're not really teas, they're tisanes. But with the coming of Chinese tea, they happily discarded the old name, and everything became tea. People drank teas made from such common garden herbs as mint, chamomile, and lemon balm, as we still do today, as well as teas from other garden herbs now less often made into teas, such as sage and thyme, which they thought were good remedies for headaches and that troublesome disease called the nightmare, and lavender and others. People also made teas from many other plants that sound more medicinal and less pleasant, and like St. John's wort and pennyroyal. And it's interesting to note that herbalists today still prescribe some of the herbs for the same conditions. I'm going to make a note of that. And in Jane Austen's time, in her unfinished novel, Sanditon, the Miss Parkers drink herbal tea, probably the least harmful of all the ways they doctor themselves. In real life, Sanditon was apparently about a health resort that some man had planned. He was quite interested in health, and it was by the sea. In real life, Jane Austen's mother drank dandelion tea, almost certainly prescribed, for her complaints, for her liver and her digestive difficulties, which she seems to have suffered from often, but then suffered, or thought she did, from a lot. Jane was apparently somewhat skeptical and less than sympathetic about Mrs. Austen's complaints. "My mother continues hearty," she once wrote to Cassandra. "Her appetite and nights are very good, and she sometimes complains of asthma, dropsy, water in her chest, and liver disorder." Another time she wrote, "She is tolerably well. She would tell you herself that she has a very dreadful cold in her head at present, but I have not much compassion for colds in the head without fever or sore throat." At any rate, Mrs. Austen was probably kept happy with her dandelion tea, a medicine that is still prescribed by herbalists today for good digestion and cleansing the liver. It was certainly less harmful than some of the outright poisonous medicines that she could have been taking, and may have even helped. She outlived her daughter Jane by 10 years. So next time we will read Tea and the Delicate Constitution. I have also want to read to you about wives and daughters, because I was on the chapter about Osborne and his mother, who was sick in bed, wanting to see him. And Molly has gone to the brother Roger and asked if there's a way that we could get a note to him. And he says, no, we don't know where he is. And I want to read a very interesting paragraph to you here about that. Where Roger explains, I have little influence over Osborne, or else he would tell my father everything about what he's doing. Well, we must leave it to time, he said. My mother would have brought us all right if she had been what she once was. Of course, she's losing her strength. He turned away, leaving Molly very sad, and this is the part I wanted you to hear. She knew that every member of that family she cared for so much was in trouble, out of which she saw no exit, and her small power of helping them was diminishing day by day as Mrs. Hamley sank more and more under the influence of her stupefying illness. Her father had spoken to her only this very day of her returning home for good. Molly, he wanted her back. Mrs. Gibson wanted her for no particular reasons, but for many small fragments of reasons, and that's the stepmother. And so I was just impressed by this. She said she knew she was stricken almost. She knew that every member of the family she cared for was in trouble, and she saw no exit. That is always a feeling that you get when there's some kind of family upheaval, but there always is an exit, and it doesn't last forever. Things change. And so here are some little instructions that I wrote down just before I came here on how to cope with these family upheavals or family problems, which a homemaker is going to notice them more because she's home. And she notices, she sees their faces, she sees their eyes, she sees their habits. When everybody's going somewhere else first thing in the morning and the family's separated all day, those people will tell you that, they don't have problems like this, and a homemaker or homeschooler will have a problem and really take it really deeply, whereas other people think it's just normal stuff. They'll take it more deeply because they realize the value of the home and the spiritual implications of everything that means so much to them. It goes far deeper than just someone having problems. And so here are some things that I wrote down that might be very helpful for you. Number one, in life, and you've heard this before, it's not unique. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. So, yes, we had bad weather the other day, and this isn't a family problem, but we had the ice storm, And so I was hoping the electric wouldn't go off or that no one would fall on the ice, because it didn't look like ice. Everything looked normal. The sidewalk looked normal. The porch looked normal. And so hope for the best, but plan for the worst. So in my mind, I was hoping for the best. We were going to, make some soup, and we were going to sit by the fire and try to keep warm and talk up, read a good book, write a letter to someone. We knew the mail wouldn't come, but we're going to write a letter anyway. And hope for the best, but plan for the worst. Okay, now what's going to be my strategy if something happens? What am I going to do first? Who am I going to call first? And then look up remedies for sore throat, things like that. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. We get some blankets out. We'll make sure all of our clothes are dry. Get socks, things like that around. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. But keep that hope for the best in the top of your mind. Some people, if you tell them there are fires all around, but they're miles away from where you are, will get so upset that they can't function, and they can't even take care of their own children because the fear grips them. Fear is a terrible thing, and it comes from lack of knowledge. Once you've figured out things and you figure out what the truth is about something, it seems like the fear abates. So the second one, so the first is hope for the best, plan for the worst. Number 2 is life never went smoothly. From the beginning of time, life has never gone smoothly. And you can quote it from the beginning of time. You can go through the Bible and show how it didn't go smoothly for everyone, but how God, when people were trusting in God and faithful to God, how He helped them overcome. And there is a scripture that says all things work together for good to them that love God and are called according to His purpose. And so all things work together for good, and even the bad things. And being of a vital age, you'll be able to see it better because you can look back and see the most worst time of your life. Remember that scene in Princess Cut where the mother talks about a young man that she admired so much, and his name was Grant. And I'm not sure what his last name was. And so her daughter said, "Oh, what happened?" And she said, "It was the worst day of my life." At the time, it seems like it's just the worst thing. But then she was able to look back and be so glad that terrible moment worked out for good. All things work together for good. And that her life got on a better track. So, life never went smoothly. And number 3, comparisons are deadly. So one of the reasons that we have discontent, and we really need to learn to be content at home, is comparisons. And some people have a problem with it. They won't even look at a pretty magazine that shows, interior decor. They don't like it because they say, well, I can't afford all that. We don't look at them for that reason. We look at them for ideas of how we could maybe use what we have. And the idea is, of course, a beautiful look, because if we're going to be at home, we want it to look nice. And so comparisons are deadly. So those are the 3 things. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. Number 2, life never went smoothly. But don't look at it in a negative way just because it never went smoothly. All those people that we read about where life didn't go exactly smoothly were led in a better direction. And number 3, comparisons are deadly. Once you start making comparisons with other people or with other things, then you start to become less content. And then it's very easy to make comparisons. I don't look at other people or things as comparisons, but as what I can glean from it. Now, there's one more thing I want to discuss, and that is we will get to these people problems. And I know I've probably talked more about that today than any other day, but the people problems is Now, this can be in a family or company or somewhere you have gone, and it is an irritation. People coughing or clearing their throats all the time. Every now and then, you'll find that there'll be one person who dominates the room just by coughing and clearing their throat constantly. And you find out who it is. Maybe they've just grown up coughing or grown up clearing their throat. And so I was talking to someone about this who said there was someone in her family. I don't know if it was like living in their home or just related to them, but whenever they were there, they constantly coughed and cleared their throat. It could have been the dry air, it could have been dust, who knows what it was, but they weren't sick. They just had this coughing and clearing the throat constantly. And so she said that what she started doing when she had little children, she said they get to coughing and clearing their throat, and she would take the children, and her and the children would go to another room and just wait and wait for a while and then listen, and after a while he stopped coughing and stopped clearing their throat. And she said she couldn't stand to listen to it, and if there was anything contagious, she didn't want her children around it. So people who cough or clear their throat are sometimes just nervous. And that's what they do. They just cough and clear their throat constantly, grunting and clearing their throat. So she wanted to get her children away from that. And she said she did notice, just by listening from the room that she was in, that he got settled down. He was talking to the other men in the room, and so she just left them there. But she did notice that when she took the children out of the room, when she left the room, because she didn't want to hear it, that it stopped, and that he began to. So sometimes they're just nervous around other people. And so I do think, too, if you tend to cough and clear your throat all the time, that perhaps you should stay home. But there are some people living in your house that maybe cough and clear their throat all the time. And you do not have to listen to it all the time. You can leave it there for a while and go do something else. And that was the only thing that we discussed, this friend of mine discussed, the people that cough and clear their throat all the time. It seems like sometimes back in the olden days, people would go to some social event, and as soon as they sat down, they started coughing and clearing their throat. I don't know if it was just the room they were in, or if it was there was something that was making them do that, but people tended to want to sit away from this. They ended up sitting alone because they were coughing constantly and clearing their throat. And they will say things like, well, I can't help it. But there are remedies of correcting that, and one would be that if it is a nervous situation, they could limit the amount of time they have with other people. And do they cough and clear their throat when they're reading by themselves or watching a movie or watching a football game? Or do they cough and clear their throat in a social situation? We don't know all these things, but I did really admire this lady who said she got her children out of the room and just let the man sit there and cough and clear his throat. And so also remember that last time I put a link on the blog where you could go and make yourself a concoction where you boiled water with different foods and spices to purify your home. And I haven't tried it yet today. I'd like to try it again, see if it has any effect on the feeling at home. But I did get a compliment one time when I had that boiling, and someone said it just made the house feel good. So I hope I have read everything. Oh, I wanted to do one more thing. Simple social graces, and that is, and of course you're probably wondering, why are you talking about everything? This is for you to listen to while you work, and so that you don't have to stop and watch something. But I'm going to read the front of this because it always stuck in my mind and impressed me so deeply. Maybe you would have the same effect on you. And it was called A Culture of Character, and self-restraint and sacrifice. What were the nuts and bolts of this remarkable code? And it was talking about the Victorian era. What were the nuts and bolts of the remarkable code that sustained the lawfulness and civility we associate with the Victorian era? It had a broad and inclusive religious foundation that was a far cry from Bible-thumping moralism. It stressed hard work, frugality, sobriety, honesty, civic responsibility, decency, good deeds, self-restraint, and self-sacrifice. Now, I've quoted to you several scriptures over time of some of these videos that I've done, some of these broadcasts, about self-control and self-restraint. Now, this is the important part that just stuck in my brain, and I can almost quote it from memory because I like it so much. It's on page 9 of Simple Social Graces, or The Benevolence of Manners. To our own generation, equating love with sacrifice and self-restraint is difficult to understand, much less accept. Isn't love a vehicle of individual happiness? If you randomly stopped people on the street and asked them to assess their lives, most would ask themselves, "Am I happy?" This is interesting. But a Victorian would ask himself, "Am I a good person?" In the seamless web of Victorian connections, self-fulfillment required social virtue, and virtue is strength and practice of goodness. Conversely, the fate of the community depended on a view of happiness that transcended a personal wish list of experience and acquisitions. As Sarah Josepha Hale, the influential female editor of Godey's Ladies' Book, America's leading magazine for women, put in 1868, her book of manners, "Happy homes and good society all year round." And this is the quote: "In the pursuit of happiness, the first right step is to seek that which is good to do, not merely for oneself, but for others. Ultimately, we reach the public good." The hallmark of Victorian character, self-restraint, was more than a means to test your mettle. It was a key deterrent to crime. The rise of modern industry and big cities, and a consequent weakening of family ties, boosted crime in the first decades of the 19th century. Yet in the second half of the century, crime declined rapidly as a result of what social scientists called intense efforts to inculcate an ethic of self-control. See, that's what we need, classes on self-control and practice. In contrast, they note that crime rates rose faster in the 20th century than can be explained by higher birth rates, owing to a shift from the ethic to one's emphasizing self-expression. So I really liked that the Victorians, instead of asking, "Am I happy?" asked, "Do I deserve the rewards of being a good person?" And their strive for happiness was pursuit of happiness. In other words, being a good person, being a hard worker, and being someone of good character would result ultimately in happiness, not a temporary feeling of giddiness or feeling good, but just a general feeling of satisfaction and accomplishment just by being good. So to our own generation, equating love with sacrifice and self-restraint is difficult to understand. Most people would ask themselves, "Am I happy?" But a Victorian would ask himself, "Am I a good person?" And then later on she says, have I done the things that deserve happiness? So ladies, I hope that this has lulled you enough today, and thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for all you do for me. I do have my writing table set out. I am going to answer a few cards. I got a few this year, maybe 5 cards this year from all of you, and I appreciate it so much. I am going to try to get those answers out sometime this next year. So I'll talk to you later. Until I see you again, stay close to Christ. Bye.